Hi everybody, my name is Liz Rivera and I am the Gem State Medium. I want to welcome you and thank you for clicking on this video. About 19 years ago, my kids' dad and I had purchased an abandoned house we found in Bingham County. It was a small town in Bingham County. It was an old stone home and it was 102 years old. We spent about 3 months putting this house back together as much as we could and renovating it. I mean, even before we could move in. When we found the house, I knew it was haunted. It felt haunted, and you couldn't help but, when you walked up to the place, just walking up to the sidewalk, you knew you were being watched. I didn't get any bad vibes. I just felt like there were people there, which has never been a deal breaker for me. I mean, I can live with roommates. I live with my husband and I have lived with all of my kids. And, you know, there's always a little good and bad, but you live with them and you make it work. So it wasn't a deal breaker. It was a great price on the house. We renovated, fixed it up. Looking back, I don't think 19 years ago, I realized when we bought it how haunted it was and how active it was going to be. So that was kind of a surprise, but as you can see, the house was very charming and I loved it. So going back to, the day that we moved in back in 2002, our first day of actual move-in time was pretty chaotic and hectic, and we were trying to get all of our boxes brought from Idaho Falls to the small town in Bingham County. And the guys, my now ex-husband, but my kids' dad, and the kids, the boys, decided they were going to go get more boxes and bring them back. And my daughter and I, my daughter was 15 at the time, decided we were going to stay and kind of, rearrange boxes and push some to the sides and get the kitchen boxes and put them in the kitchen and the bedroom ones in the bedroom. And that way make room for when the truck got there. So we stayed behind and, I figured they would be gone an hour or two, between the drive times there and back and packing and unloading. After we got all my daughter and I got the boxes put away where they needed to go, we had a little bit of time before they got back. And so we sat down. We both sat down on the stairs that were in the center of the house. And we had only sat down for a few minutes. And there was a knock on the door. We haven't even moved in and somebody's knocking on the door. So I was tired, and being the mom that I am, I told my 15-year-old, thinking, she's young and spry, she can go get the door. I said, go get the door. And she looked at me and kind of smiled back at me and said, you go get the door. And I gave her the serious mom look, and she got up and went and got the door. And she just turned around and looked at me, and she was kind of wide-eyed and said, there's nobody here. I said, what do you mean there's nobody here? As I was getting up, I went to go check to see what she was talking about, and I walked outside with her. There was nobody on the porch. We walked around the house. There was nobody around the house. We looked. In the pictures, you can see that there was a fence around the house. At the time we moved in, there was no fence. There wasn't any sort of, there wasn't a garage. All that stuff was built by us. So when we moved in, it was just a wide open space. That little bully barn out back, that wasn't there. We put that in. So at the time that we moved in, there was nothing there. So there was no place for anybody to hide and get away that quickly. It was just impossible. That was our first experience with this house and what was to come with, people knocking on the doors, hearing things in the middle of the night, during the day, seeing people. Everybody in the house had experiences. Everybody has stories to tell. We brought in different paranormal investigators, a couple of them. There was one particular day, probably 2 years into living there and living with the paranormal activity, and it was just paranormal activity, so it was fine. Anyway, I had a day where, and it was fall. The kids had started back to school, and my youngest was still at home. She was 4, and I was home with her that day, and it was lunchtime. I made her some mac and cheese, I believe it was, and called her down for lunch, and she didn't respond. I thought that was odd, so I hollered at her again, told her to come down. Lunch was ready, and she still didn't respond. And so I went to go look for her. I knew she'd been upstairs, and I could hear her playing upstairs, and she was in her sister's room, which she probably wasn't supposed to be playing with their Barbies or their dollhouse, but they were at school, so it was fine. She wasn't doing any harm. So I went to go towards the stairs to call her down, and she was sitting in the center of the stairs. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, well, I can't come down because that man's in my way. And she pointed to the bottom of the stairs. I looked over, and I didn't see him. Now, being a medium, it's a little unnerving, but I also know that there are times when not all mediums see or are shown the same things at the same time, and he was showing himself to her. I now know, because of this whole event and because of what happened in that house, that she is a medium. She's the only, all of my kids have seen ghosts and paranormal stuff just because they live with me, and so it's always around. And so they've always had that opportunity to see things. But my youngest is just a little bit different, and she was seeing things and communicating, and that gift never left from the time she was like 2. So this had been building, and so when she told me that this man was down there and he wouldn't let her pass, I believed her. And so I walked around the stairs to the side of the stairs because they kind of came down at an angle. And I went, instead of her coming down the side, I went over to the back and put my arms out to her and told her, I said, well, hop down this way and we'll go around him. And that's just what we did. So as we ate lunch, we decided we'd just put it on the coffee table and kind of sit down on the couch and talk and eat. I asked her what this man looked like, and she said he's a mean man, and he's the boss of the other men that are with him. And so I kind of took it that he wasn't necessarily a mean, evil, bad man, but that he was the boss of somebody. So he commanded attention, was basically what I got from her. I asked her, what was he wearing? And she says he was a pirate. And I'm thinking, sure, an Idaho pirate, that makes no sense. So I tried to figure out a little bit more what she was talking about. And so I went and got a video case of Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, it had just come out on video. And so I brought it over to her and held up the box with Johnny Depp on it. And I said, this is a pirate. Is this what you saw? And she shook her head and kind of rolled her eyes a little bit at me and said, no, that's not it. And I said, okay, that's what I was wondering. She said he had a sword. So I'm guessing that's why she said a pirate, and that was her first thought, pirate. Anyway, so she stood up as soon as she said that and said he wasn't. She said he had a sword And he stood up and he stood like this. And she, as a 4-year-old, was standing like she was holding a rifle. And she said, and he has a sword and he has a badge. And I said, like a star, like a star right here. And she said, no. And I said, maybe a circle with a star, like that kind of a badge. And she said, no. I went over maybe, you know, maybe a fire department badge, or, you know, and she just grew a little more frustrated, I'm sorry. And so I said, I guess I don't understand. And she stood up again and she said he had a badge and it went from here to here. So then I'm thinking sash. So, okay, so we've got a sash, we've got a sword, and we've got a rifle. And I said, honey, how about if we draw what he looked like? And so I went and got some crayons and ripped off a piece of paper off of a notepad and handed it to her. And I said, can you draw and show me what he looked like? And she took the crayons and this is what she drew. When I looked at it, my immediate thought was Civil War. Not sure why I thought that, but just kind of what she described, that was just my first initial gut feeling from the picture was Civil War. And then my next thought was, again, we're in Idaho, Civil War, that doesn't make a lot of sense for this area. So then I thought, well, maybe she's talking about Fort Hall, which was relatively close within, you know, 30 miles or so from where we were living. Entirely possible, you know, I don't know. I would guess that the Fort Hall cavalry people would have, or could have, or anybody around that area, you know, could ride wherever. I'm pretty sure there were soldiers that were there. Anyway, I need to do more research on that. But that was my next thought was, you know, maybe Fort Hall soldiers or somebody that was there, you know, that's who she's seeing. But I wasn't sure. I just kept going back to that Civil War, even though it didn't make sense. And at that point, because of all of the things that she had told me over the last 2 years and her constant communication, as little as she was from the age of 2, when we first started moving in, telling me that, you know, people would talk to her and she didn't like it and different things. And I just listened. I didn't encourage because I didn't want her to learn to embellish. I wanted what, you know, things to develop as they were going to. Either they were going to disappear or they were going to stay with her as far as a mediumship ability. So I decided to do some research. So any little bit of time that I got free of the kids, I decided to go ahead and start researching this house. And I knew it was built 102 years ago, but that's about all I knew. And I knew that when we bought the house, they had told us that in Bingham County courthouse lady said that at one time there was a clerk that worked there who thought that a lot of these old houses and deeds and stuff were so old that nobody lived there or that it wasn't important anymore. And so they got rid of them, basically burned them, and they were gone. So the only way I could look up all of the info on that house, I had to start with the deed records and the big books in the back of the vault and just start from when we bought it, from who we bought it, and then from who, and from those people backwards to whom they bought it from, and so on and so forth so forth until I got to the original people that purchased it, purchased the land and built the houses. And what I found out was that the original people who bought it were and built it, the man's name was Robert Quinn. Okay, so I did all the research and found out who originally had purchased the home, well, at least the land, and then built the homes on top of them. And their names, well, the guy's name was Robert Quinn. And so from there, I went to the libraries and started digging. I went to the Blackfoot Library, the Shelley Library, and also to the Idaho Falls Library. And they have great Idaho history rooms or sections that you can go and just find the history on your small town or your local area, and eventually your house and such. So I did that, and with the name Robert Quinn, I did find him in the books for this small town and the history of his family. And what I learned was, in fact, that when he was about 15 years old, his parents, William and Sarah Quinn, were converted to the LDS religion. William and Sarah had 8 kids, and once they had converted to the LDS religion, they decided to move from their hometown, which was Sturgis, Mississippi. And in fact, William was a Confederate soldier. And not only was he a Confederate soldier during the Civil War, he was the flag bearer. And he still had the flag. And I believe the way he pronounced flag, the flag that he carried was a homemade flag. And I read in the archives, I mean, the story of that flag was actually printed in the Post Register at one time when it was rediscovered and donated. But that flag, they said the stitching was so small and so fine and so perfect, it looked like it was done by a modern day sewing machine, which is really cool. But it said Octavia County Plowboys. I believe it says victory or death on it. I haven't seen the flag in a long time, but here is a picture of it. So what we know about the flag is that when they decided to move out west, they brought their 8 children and moved to Bingham County, and William brought that flag with him. And he passed away 3 years after they got here to Idaho. And his son, Robert Quinn, the one who built the stone house that we lived in, brought the flag with him and moved it into the house, and then he kept it safe and kept it in a trunk. He kept that flag until he passed away. And so everything that I found out absolutely was validation for what my 4-year-old had told me. And she drew pictures of, again, the soldier, his gun. You know, she was acting like she was holding a rifle, but she also drew a handgun with the curved handle and some of those things. And I remember taking that photo to one of the high school teachers that was around there who had written a few books on the Civil War and was very knowledgeable, and gave him her, her crayon drawing and asked him what he thought. And he just leaned back in his chair and said absolutely everything that he has on and she has said he was carrying is 100% accurate. And he says, I know this flag. He says, I have read the history on it, and I know the county she's talking about, and this is really cool. And he says, but if you tell anybody about our conversation, I'll deny it, because I think, you know, and he laughed. He was being lighthearted about it, but the idea of ghosts and the paranormal 19 years ago was just, it was still not that out there. And so I think some people shied away from it, especially a high school teacher, even though he was so involved with the Civil War and the history and writing books and stuff. You know, I still thank him for sitting down and talking to me about it. So anyway, back to what, you know, the house and what I found out from the research. You know, other than the Civil War and that she was right, I started looking at all of the names on the list of previous homeowners, and what I learned was that the house had been through many hands over the years, and one person who owned it housed school marms for surrounding schools. So, you know, kind of like an Airbnb for teachers for a while back in, you know, the early 1900s. And then also it also was, all it said was it was a county hospital. So once I had done all the research on the house and found out who built it and that it had been a boarding house for the school teachers, and that it had also doubled as a county hospital for a short period of time, I really wanted to understand maybe why they had, you know, let it also double as a county hospital when there were, you know, the hospitals in Blackfoot or Shelley or some of these other towns that were just a little bit bigger. And what I learned was there was the pandemic. So the hospitals were needed and doctors were needed. I realized that there was a huge outbreak in the rural communities, and it really hit hard in Idaho. A lot of people owned their homes in town. So this is what I found out, that when they owned their houses and their little plot of land that they had bought, their lots, for $20.50. Wish we could have those prices. $20.50, I'm sure was a lot of money back then. But anyway, so they had these homes they lived in during the winter months. And once it was summer, if they chose to, they could go to the foothills that surround Idaho Falls, you know, Bonneville County, Bingham County, all those places, that they could go and live up there and farm. If they did that for 6 months, then that plot of land was theirs. And so a lot of people went up and farmed in the foothills. When this pandemic hit in 1918, there's a lot of stories that tell of the people in town, you know, being very frightened of everybody getting sick and people dying. And so some of them decided they were going to go to the foothills, to their farming homes, and self-quarantine and hopefully escape the pandemic and sickness and possibly death. What they didn't understand, I think, back in 1918 was that even though they left, a week or two later, they were getting sick. They had taken it with them, and over that incubation period, it finally showed itself. So then they're up in the foothills where there weren't any doctors or help, any way to get help other than to come back into town. And so they had to turn around and load up their loved ones who were sick and probably with pneumonia by then, and try to get back into town to get the help that they needed. And many people died. And so, you know, it's really sad to think that a lot of these hauntings can be from time periods back then, and that so many people died. And of course there were tons of other reasons why people died back then, but it was interesting to run across, and that really was my first experience. And finding out about the pandemic was, you know, because of the whole haunting of that house. So that's my pandemic story. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I am, you know, not sure I did anybody any good, but, you know, I'm doing what I can, and I hope you guys come back. I'm hoping I get better at making videos. You know, I'm used to going to a studio and having somebody do it, or standing in front of a camera and having a real camera guy do it. I don't know how to do this, so please bear with me. I got my little phone, watched a couple of YouTube videos, and this is what you get. So hopefully the next one will be better. Thank you for clicking on this video, and I hope that you enjoy my paranormal experiences and some of the things I've learned through the years. Bye.